finally time to do my 486 build off. I've got an old desktop case here that's kind of ugly, but that's okay. And a pile of hardware, and let's just not mess around at all, and let's just dig right on in. Now, of course, any retro PC build off is going to begin with the motherboard. And I've selected this one mostly because it's what I have available that that has the features that I want. This is a pretty nice one. All of the ISA slots are 16-bit ISA slots, which is a feature. Of course, it's AT. The battery was removed quite some time ago, and just in time. There's still, it looks like maybe a little bit of crust or some kind of cruft on the external battery connector there that I didn't quite clean off as well as I should have, but I've used this board off and on a few times, and I know that it works, and I trust it. And I'm going to pair it with four megabyte SIMs to max it out. The SX processors of this generation only had a 24-bit address bus, so they could only address up to 16 megabytes. I am also going to have, at least during the build, the single most important piece of hardware that you should have when doing work on retro PCs, and that's one of these, a Port 80 postcode card. This one I like because it has both an ISA connector and a PCI connector, so that it can be used in a variety of different boards. And depending on where you're going to put it, it may be oriented facing one direction or the other, whichever way may be more convenient when dealing with PCI systems. I'm going to set some of this stuff off to the side. Moving down the list, just sort of a generic multi-IO card. You've got to have a disk controller and serial ports and game ports and all that stuff. The usuals. Now, I picked this Cirrus Logic ISA video card. It's kind of funny. I wasn't originally going to use this card, but within, I think, 3 days of each other, I got this card, and I got this card, which is the VESA local bus version of the same card. And a little bit later, I've got some other projects coming up in December that I'm going to do, and I hope that I will have time to do some comparisons of these two cards, both in the same system, although obviously not this system, and across different systems to get some kind of more apples to apples kind of performance comparisons between different systems. Compare these two cards in an appropriate 486 that has VLB, and then compare this card in this system and in another 486 system, that kind of thing. So you can sort of reduce the number of variables in your comparisons to try to figure out which things matter. Also, mostly related to what I'm going to do in December, I'm going to pick this network card and this sound card. Now, this sound card isn't really era appropriate. I mean, this is a 1996 sound card, so it isn't really appropriate for this particular build, but I have like 7 of these. I don't know why I have so many of these cards, and I have a bunch of, not this exact network card, but similar network cards, and when it comes time in December, I'm going to build a bunch of systems, and keeping the sound card and network card configurations as similar as possible across those different DOS systems will save me a bunch of headaches. For disk, I have no nostalgia for spinning Rust. I hate it. It's loud, it's hot, it's failure prone. So I'm going to use one of these. It's a CompactFlash adapter, and this is I want to say it's a 256 megabyte CF card. Now, I normally use these the SD card adapters. I much prefer these. I find these to be generally more compatible with the CF cards. They're basically passive. I mean, there's no chips on here at all. And so whether or not it's going to work in a system depends a lot more on the system and the particular CF card that you're using. And so there's just a lot of variables, and I might configure this and have it working in this board and take this exact thing and put it in a different system and have it not work. I don't have any of those kind of problems with these. The reason I'm going to use this one with this build is I've already used this setup previously a couple years ago with this system, so I know that it works, and so I want to make use of it, and I can, save these for other systems that where this kind of a device may not actually be compatible. And then, just for fun, what would a build off be without some upgrades? I'm gonna put a math coprocessor. I haven't decided which one I'm going to use. This is a 25 megahertz CPU, so either one of these will work. I'm leaning towards the IIT chip, but there's no. It doesn't really matter. I'm not gonna run Quake on this. I'm not gonna do anything that particularly needs floating point. Yeah. So I think that's gonna be this build off. Wait. What? What's that you say? This is. Oh, right. This is 486 build off. Well, fortunately, I can fix that with this. So this is an upgrade, a snap-on upgrade that fits, it would fit oriented like this, over top of the 486SX and upgrades it to a 486 SX-LC250. So this is a pretty severely cut down 486 processor. It has no math coprocessor. It will use the math coprocessor slotted into the motherboard. It has the same 24-bit address bus of the 386SX, which is the same 24-bit address bus of a 286. Essentially, a 386SX is a 386 chopped down to a 286. And this is a 486 chopped down to a thing that's chopped down. So it has the same 24-bit address bus. It has the same 16-bit data bus. So this will not be as fast as a 46 DX250 on most things, just because of the reduced data bus. And it's limited to 16 megabytes. Now, this comes with a, when I got this, it came with a driver disk. Now, I'm not expecting this to be drivers per se, but the BIOS on this is not going to know how to configure the cache or other things for a 486 because it's a 386 motherboard. So what I'm assuming is on this disk are some utilities to configure the cache and maybe do some other kinds of tweaks that you would expect to be in the BIOS that aren't, because it's not for this. Now, this also came with a small heatsink with a little bit of adhesive, and I am not going to use it. I refuse to stick heat sinks to chips. It is, I hate it. I hate it so much. Whenever I see people stick heat sinks on all of the DIP 40 chips in a Commodore 64, I scream, because what happens when you take all those chips out and set them on your workbench, and now, oh crap, what chip is what? Right? You can't tell what any chip is when there's a heatsink permanently adhered to the artwork on it. I won't do it. Now, some years ago, I acquired this chip that has a small aluminum heatsink adhesive to it, and I had no idea what it was. There was no way to be able to tell. There's no markings on the heatsink around any of the sides. You can see some witness marks here of where I tried to get the heatsink off. Finally, I got mad. I mean, at the point where you have no idea what a chip is and you can't know what a chip is, it's already garbage. So there was only one way that this was going to end, and that was with me, the winner. So this was this was a 286, but because someone thought it was a great idea to permanently adhere a heatsink to it and then throw it in a bin of stuff, it's trash. So I will not do that. Instead, what I'm intending to do is I think I'm going to use this heatsink because it's got this weird foam ring on it. I'm not sure what that is about, but that seems to fit just perfectly there. So I'm going to use a little bit of heatsink compound in the middle here. And then what I think I'm going to do to keep it in place is there's a really small gap here. I'm going to very, very gently run a couple of zip ties through and around and tighten them just enough to kind of hold this in place. I'm not really worried about this flying around and going crazy and flopping off. So I think with just the zip ties to kind of hold it in place and an appropriate amount of heatsink compound, I think this will be fine. If that turns out to not be an adequate cooling solution, you know what? I can add a giant honkin' silent fan to the system and it will be adequately cool. Now, previously I brought up that the 386SX is basically a 386 chopped into a 286 form factor for a reason. Because I also have this, which I have had for years and years and years. This is also a 486 50 megahertz upgrade. But this this sockets into a, let me turn this around so that the very, very hard to read writing on here is a little bit visible. This sockets into a PLCC 286 socket to upgrade it to a 486, and I'm guessing that I'm not exactly sure what role this chip plays in the whole operation, but 286s would not have run at an appropriate speed to clock double to 50 megahertz, and I, based on this on the markings here, and I haven't removed this label, I don't think that this is a clock double chip, so this might just be a straight 50 megahertz chip, so this may be clock generator stuff. I don't know. I've never had a proper 286 that I could try this out in. Someday I may. It sits in a static bag in a box somewhere, hanging out, and so maybe someday I'll get to play with this toy. But that day is not today. And that would not have worked with this kind of 286 because this is the other kind, and also it had a bad day. All right. Well, that is all the parts that I'm going to use for this build off that will now actually be a legit 486 build off. The one last component I'm going to load, obviously DOS, and I'm going to follow the wise words of high treason and don't be a screw up. Load DOS 622 up. I could not even say that with a straight face at all. I don't know how he does it. He always says, every video he says that and somehow keeps a straight face. I can't do it. Anyway, let's go ahead and put all this together and get this build off building. I decided to install some of the components before putting the motherboard in the case. I knew the math coprocessor socket would be inaccessible once installed in the case, and I had a feeling the Sims were going to be a hassle to get installed. Call it intuition. After encountering a couple computers ruined by having rodents live inside of them, I have become adamant about blocking all expansion slots and other openings that could emit a furry little varmint into the computer. That's why I'm messing around with these slot covers. I have a habit of putting sound cards at the far end of the motherboard. No real reason, just habit. Most of the other cards can go pretty much wherever. There's no rhyme or reason to the placement. But I like to have the I/O card close to the drives just so the cables aren't strung all over the case and in the way. The serial port cables also usually don't reach very far. The one thing that I forgot to gather beforehand was an IDE cable, so I had to grab one from a little farther off camera. None of the front panel connectors are labeled. Speaker is usually easy to guess, as is the hard drive LED. I'll have to pop the front cover off later to figure out which cable is reset and which is the power LED. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, last but not least, it's usually helpful to connect a power supply. With AT motherboards, I usually like to connect the power supply before putting the motherboard in the case, but I forgot this time. Those connectors can also be a hassle. All right, I did a couple of things off camera. One, I put electrical tape on the back of this CF card, and I mounted another little motherboard standoff rivet into the case, and I just screwed it down so it's not going to flop around, but I can still get at it to be able to pop the CF card out. I also installed the software from this disk, but I didn't let it set up, make its changes to the auto exec bat. It really just wanted to make one tiny change, but I can do that later. I want to play around with it. And I also still haven't yet installed this guy. I want to run a couple things and show some stuff on camera from the other angle first, and then I'll do that. So I'm going to do a bunch of stuff, and there will be much editing. Before I install the little 46 accelerator, I can just leave that sitting there. I want to look at a couple things on this system just so we could see how much of a difference this makes. Now, the Evergreen stuff installed some things in this ET drivers directory. And if I remember, so there's the cache control program, and it wants to install a line that invokes that in the auto exec bat, which we can take a look at, which I bet that this just has some kind of, so various configuration stuff, and I'm not sure which is which I think. So it wanted to, okay, so let's take a look at, see what it wanted to add. Okay, so it wants to run it with the /C2 option. Okay. All right. But there's also this little diagnostic program that's kind of interesting because it shows a bunch of things about the system, both before and, we can look at it both before and after. Please wait while system is checked. Okay. So it detects that it's a 25 megahertz 3U6SX. Seemed like, oh, okay. So it shows no FPU. One's installed, but I forgot to re-enable it in the BIOS the last time when I turned this back on. Correctly detects the video card. I mean, nothing super fancy there. And then where to go to buy stuff. So it's showing a little benchmark score there of 5060. We'll see how that looks after upgrading the processor here. All right, so then the other, I mean, for computers of this vintage, there's really only one benchmark that matters. Now, this is way below the minimum system spec for Doom. It has 16 megs of RAM, so that's the main thing. 32-bit processor, at least 8 megs of RAM. You can eventually, if you're patient and willing to wait for it to load, you can run Doom. I don't have any speakers hooked up to it, so we don't get to hear the charming soundtrack, which sounds sarcastic, but I do enjoy the Doom soundtrack. Well, let's see how. Oh, oh, this is gonna be so bad. It's knee deep in the slideshow. So, yeah, it runs correctly. I'll give it that. I wouldn't want to try and play this. Wow, the input lag is so painful. Okay. So it runs, and we can remember how painful this is. Let's flip things around, and let's put this back in, and I'll try it once with this in, and with the math coprocessor still disabled, and try to remember the benchmark score in their little DIG program that was 5060, I want to say. All right, let's take a pause and see how this affects things. All right, I'm going to go ahead and install this now and see if I can get in here. So this has got marked. It's marked a lot quite well. So there's a dot on the chip noting pin 1 and a little marker there noting pin 1. And on the motherboard down here, it may not be possible to see it, but there's a 1 over here on the motherboard. So this corner is 1. So it's just important to make those line up. And hopefully, now the one thing I'm a little bit concerned about is this little tantalum capacitor down here is kind of in the way of this corner. I'm not super excited about that, but I should be able to just push this down. And it should set down. And then now for the time being, if I can find that heatsink that I had, which I'm not seeing here anywhere obvious, so, oh, here it is. So I'm actually going to just set that on there carefully, and for simple testing right now, before I close this all up and put the lid on it, that should be adequate. I'm really not worried about the thermals on this. At least not with the case open and everything. All right, well let's light it up and give it another go. Does recognize it as a 486, so that's a first good sign, which is interesting. So it might have actually enabled the cache. Curious. All right, well, let's take a look at their program and see how that detects. It's going to go through its usual process of detecting all the things. So that is interesting. I don't know what to make of this. I don't know why the benchmark score went down. It was 5060, right? That's okay. Well, we can quit out of this. And what was that program called? And it was what? It was C2, I think, was the option. Okay. See if that makes any difference. Whoa! Yeah, that made a difference. That made a difference. Basically, tripled it, and now correct clock speed Everything looks good. All right, so running that program must set the clock and also enable the cache. So it's got 8K right through cache, which is what you would expect on this generation of 46. There were some AMD 46s that had a write back cache, which is a different cache policy. I think in my December videos, I'm going to have one of those AMD processors, and I'll talk more about write back versus write through. That's some deep technical stuff, some serious nerding. All right, but enough serious nerding. Let's see how much faster this is, because it's the one true test, right? Can it run Doom? And can it run Doom playably? Oh, please. I mean, certainly it should be able to run it playably, possibly at a reduced screen size. Oh yeah, that's already better. No menu lag. Oh, this is so much better. Yeah, this feels playable like this, for sure. Oh yeah, okay. Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, there you go. 46, 50 megahertz, perfectly runnable. I'm going to do some additional upgrades on the system. I'm still having difficulty getting the network card working properly. That's going to take a few more days, and I didn't think that it was going to quite make September, and I really wanted to get this out in time for 46 build off. I also, if you remember from the previous views, the motherboard has some cache slots, and I don't think I have the right cache chips. Usually 386 motherboards can only handle 64K of L2 cache, so I'm gonna try to get some of that and get this thing just as cherried out as possible. And then in December, I'm gonna put it up against this other PC that's out of frame, which is a real 46 DX266, and the goal will be to play some head-to-head network Doom. I have to say, I'm actually pretty impressed with the performance of that 46 upgrade chip. I knew it'd give it a pretty, significant speed boost, but it can play Doom at almost full settings at a very, very playable frame rate, and I'm pretty impressed. So that wraps this one up. If you would like to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, links are down in the description for both. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button. If you are interested in seeing any of the follow-ups, especially the big Network Doom follow-up that I'm going to do in December, click the subscribe button. And until next time, try to remember the good stuff.